Okay, so we're diving deep today into the Social Security Code of 2020, and wow, you really did come prepared with like a whole stack of materials here.
It's quite the legislative rabbit hole we're going down.
Seriously, though, it is impressive. We've got excerpts directly from the code itself, those frequently asked questions, which can be super helpful.
Right, those FAQs can really clear up some of the finer points.
For sure. And then there's the breakdowns of the key provisions, like all the different parts of the code. Plus, we've got info on the organizations involved, the summaries of all the core ideas, even a whole study guide.
With quiz questions, even.
Yeah, exactly. So where I think we should start is with kind of a roadmap for our deep dive today. We're going to be carefully going through all of this, really meticulously, and the goal is to pull out the most important parts.
The real nuggets of wisdom.
Exactly, and ultimately give you a clear and insightful and really thorough understanding of this law. So think of this as your express lane to understanding the Social Security Code.
Your shortcut to navigating this dense legislation.
Perfect. Now, something that jumps out right away is just how big of a deal this whole thing is. It's like they're trying to bring all these different existing Social Security laws together.
And not just that, but they're also trying to make sure everyone's covered, no matter what kind of work they do.
Yeah, so organized workers, unorganized workers, everyone. It's like they're shooting for this more unified, universal kind of framework for Social Security across the board. Pretty ambitious stuff.
Definitely ambitious. And, when you're dealing with such a huge and diverse workforce as India has, putting that into practice, well, that's going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out.
For sure. All right, so where do we even begin with something this massive? Well, I think a good starting point is with the basics, right? Like, what's the official name of this thing? So it's not explicitly stated in the main part of the code excerpts you gave me.
Right, I noticed that too.
But luckily, we have the trusty FAQs to turn to, and they confirm that it's officially the Social Security Code 2020. Simple enough, right?
Straightforward.
Yes. And just as important, we need to know when this whole thing became official. So it received the presidential seal of approval on September 28th, 2020, and then it was officially published the very next day, September 29th. So that means it's been the law of the land since then, and it also tells us this is relatively recent legislation.
Yeah, that timeline is key. I mean, it marks the moment this became legally binding. And in the bigger scheme of things, this signifies a pretty big shift in India's approach to Social Security laws, especially considering how recent it is.
Absolutely. So now the big question, why? Why this new code? What problem are they trying to solve, or what goal are they trying to achieve?
Right to the heart of the matter.
Well, if we look at the code itself, the preamble states pretty clearly that the main aim is to, and I'm quoting here, to amend and consolidate the laws relating to Social Security with the goal to extend Social Security to all employees and workers, either in the organized or unorganized or any other sectors, and for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. So basically, they're trying to create this all-encompassing system where everyone, regardless of what kind of work they do, has some form of Social Security.
That's the driving force, this idea of inclusivity. This is a fascinating departure from the kind of piecemeal system that was in place before. This is about trying to integrate everything and everyone under a single code. But of course, translating that ambition into reality, especially in a country as diverse as India, well, there are bound to be some hurdles along the way.
Definitely challenges ahead. Now, to understand how this code actually works and who it impacts, we need to look at the language, the specific words they use. There are a bunch of key definitions that really shape how this whole thing is applied. So let's start with persons who seek employment. Now, you might think this is just about people looking for jobs.
Yeah, at first glance, it seems pretty straightforward.
Right. But the code actually takes a much broader approach. It's not just those actively searching for work, but it also includes, get this, the people and organizations doing the hiring.
Oh, interesting.
So we're talking about entities looking to hire, organizations that report job vacancies, even folks seeking career advice or guidance, whether they're aiming for traditional employment or they want to strike out on their own with some self-employment venture. It really paints a much more complete picture of the whole employment landscape, not just focusing on the job seekers themselves.
So it's not just about protecting those seeking employment, but also about potentially shaping the environment in which that employment happens. By including those involved in hiring and guidance, it hints at a possible link to promoting job creation and skill development. Though, to be fair, those specific mechanisms aren't really spelled out in the excerpts we have.
That's a really good observation. It'll be interesting to see how those aspects play out in practice. Okay, moving on to another important definition, appropriate government. This is huge because it determines who's calling the shots, whether it's the big guys, the central government, or the individual states.
The division of power, that's always a key issue.
Absolutely. So for a specific set of entities, the central government is the one in charge. This includes things like ports, air transport services, telecommunications, banking and insurance companies, corporations established by a central law.
Big players, national infrastructure.
Right, the essentials. It also includes central public sector undertakings and their subsidiaries, autonomous bodies that the central government controls, and companies where the central government holds at least 51% of the shares. And get this, even if the central government's share later drops below 51%, they still remain the appropriate government for those central public sector entities.
Okay, so once it's in, it's in.
Exactly. And lastly, it also covers establishments that operate in multiple states, like those with a nationwide presence. Now, for any establishment that doesn't fall under this umbrella, the appropriate government is the state where that establishment is located.
So a clear division based on the nature and reach of the establishment.
Exactly. This is super important because it affects how the code is actually implemented and enforced across the entire country. Think about businesses operating in several states, but not under the central government's list. They'll have to navigate the rules of multiple states, and that could mean different compliance requirements depending on where they are.
Yeah, that could create quite the regulatory puzzle for businesses to solve.
For sure. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about the definition of child, but specifically how it's defined in Chapter 6, which we can guess is related to maternity benefits.
Okay, so child in the context of maternity leave and benefits.
Right. And here, the definition gets pretty broad. It's not just your biological or adopted sons and daughters.
Which would be the most common assumption, I'd say.
Yeah, but it goes beyond that. It includes specific situations like minor illegitimate children, married minor daughters, widowed minor daughters, and even a stillborn child.
Wow, so it covers a lot of different familial circumstances.
It does, and there's more. It can also extend to include, in certain cases, minor brothers, unmarried minor sisters, widowed minor sisters who are still minors, widowed daughters-in-law.
Okay, so expanding beyond the immediate children.
Right. And even the minor children of a son or daughter who has passed away, but only if both of their parents are no longer alive. It can even include a grandparent if the employee's own parents have passed away.
That's a really broad definition.
It is, right. I think what they're doing is recognizing that families come in all shapes and sizes, and dependencies can go beyond the traditional nuclear family.
It's a more inclusive way of looking at who might rely on an employee, especially during a time like maternity leave.
Totally. Okay, now let's get into something a little more concrete, the definition of a factory. Under this code, it's not just any place with some machines, it's very specific. It's any premises, and that includes the surrounding areas where a manufacturing process is happening and where at least 20 workers are working with power, or at least 40 workers are working without power, on any given day in the past year.
So we're drawing a line based on the scale of the operation and whether they're using power or not.
Exactly. And there are some important exclusions too, like mines, mobile units for the armed forces, railway running sheds, and hotels and restaurants. So these limits and exceptions are all about clearly defining which industrial setups fall under the code's rules for factories.
Which makes sense. You'd want to tailor the regulations to the specific risks and conditions of different types of factories.
Absolutely. Now, if a factory is the place, who's the person in charge? The code calls this the occupier of a factory, and this is the individual who ultimately has control over everything that goes on there, and they get super specific about who this is depending on the type of organization. If it's a firm, any of the partners can be considered the occupier. If it's a company, any director, except for those independent directors, can be the occupier. And for government-owned or controlled factories or those owned by local authorities, it's the appointed manager who's in the hot seat.
So they're making sure there's always someone clearly accountable, no matter how the factory is set up.
Exactly. That's super important for making sure someone's responsible for following the rules. Now we've only scratched the surface of these key definitions. There are a bunch more that appear throughout the code, and each one plays a role in how it's applied.
It's all in the details.
Right. So let's quickly run through some of the other important ones. There's agent, which basically means someone who's acting on behalf of the owner, managing or controlling things. Then there's audiovisual production, and this has a surprisingly wide scope. It includes all kinds of stuff like cartoons, ads, films, web series, even sports programs, as long as they're made entirely or partially in India.
Wow, they're really covering all the bases there.
Right. And then we've got building or other construction work. This covers a ton of different construction activities, but they specifically exclude anything related to factories or mines, projects that fall below a certain number of workers in cost, and any work that's done for someone's own home if it costs less than a specific amount. And this leads us to the definition of a building worker, which is someone doing skilled, semi-skilled, or unskilled labor on a construction project, but not those who are mostly doing management or admin work. Contract labor gets its own definition too, and it includes migrant workers who come from other states but doesn't include the contractor's regular employees. Then there's employer, which is a big one. It covers all kinds of workplaces and includes the factory occupier, the owner or manager of a mine, and basically anyone who has the ultimate say in other types of establishments. And here's an important one: fixed-term employment. This type of employment comes with a special rule that ensures these workers get benefits that are proportional to those permanent employees. Then there's gig worker and platform work, which shows they're recognizing these new, evolving types of jobs.
So they're trying to keep up with the changing world of work.
Absolutely. Next up is permanent total disablement, which they define by referencing a specific list of injuries that prevent someone from doing the work they used to be able to do. Plantation has its own definition based on the size of the land and what's included, and specifically excludes factories. Wage is a complex one because it excludes things like travel allowances and housing allowances for most calculations, but it includes those things when it comes to making sure everyone's getting paid fairly and equally. We've also got wage ceiling, wage worker, and WOM, which includes women who are commissioning surrogacy, at least when it comes to Chapter 4 of the Code. So yeah, they're really getting into the specifics with these definitions, which is crucial for making sure the code can be applied correctly across all these different industries and types of work relationships.
It's a testament to the complexity of the labor market and the need for a framework that can address all those nuances.
Right. And, with the specific inclusion of definitions for gig workers and platform workers, it shows they're aware that the world of work is changing and that they need to adapt Social Security to cover those folks too.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Traditional employment structures aren't the only game in town anymore, and the code seems to recognize that.
Okay, so now we have a better idea of who and what this code applies to. Let's shift gears and focus on the organizations that actually make all this happen, the Social Security organizations, as they call them. The code sets up a whole structure of different organizations that are responsible for putting all these provisions into action. We've got the Central Board of Trustees of the Employees Provident Fund, the Employees State Insurance Corporation, the National Social Security Board for Unorganized Workers, State Unorganized Workers Social Security Boards, and State Building and Other Construction Workers Welfare Boards. That's a mouthful, right?
Quite a few players on the field.
Yeah, and each one has its own specific role to play in making sure different groups of workers get their Social Security benefits. So, while we know they all have their own jobs, it makes you wonder how they all work together to make sure everyone's covered. Like, what's the relationship between the National Board for Unorganized Workers and the state boards?
Yeah, good question. While the details of how they interact aren't fully laid out in these materials, it seems logical that the National Board would set the overall policies and guidelines for unorganized workers, the big picture stuff. Then the state boards would be the ones actually putting those policies into action, making adjustments for the specific needs and conditions of their states.
Like a top-down approach, but with some room for local adaptation.
Yeah, that's a pretty common model in federal systems.
It makes sense. Now let's talk about the actual benefits people get from this code. What are we talking about here?
Well, the excerpts don't always give us all the nitty-gritty details of each scheme, but the code gives both the central and state governments the power to create a whole bunch of different programs. We see some familiar ones mentioned, like the Employees Provident Fund Scheme, the Employees Pension Scheme, and the Employees Deposit Linked Insurance Scheme.
So those are some of the established programs carrying over.
Yeah, and they're also planning on setting up new schemes specifically for self-employed individuals and other worker categories. Chapter 6 is all about maternity benefits, which we touched on earlier. And there's talk of benefits for sickness and disability, gratuity payments under Chapter 5, and specific death and disability benefits and pensions for those working in construction, which are handled by those dedicated welfare boards we talked about. Oh, and something I think is super important is Section 151. This part basically says that any money an employee gets under this code can't be taken away by a court order. That's a crucial safeguard. It ensures that these benefits actually reach the workers they're intended for and aren't siphoned off for other debts or claims.
Exactly. And to make things even more secure, Any money an employer owes under this code is considered a priority if the company goes bankrupt. So in those insolvency proceedings, those Social Security dues are high up on the list of things that need to be paid.
So it's about making sure those benefits are both accessible and protected, creating a real safety net for workers.
Exactly. Now let's get into how they manage all of this. The code mentions some important administrative roles, like the Central Provident Fund Commissioner and the Director General of the Employees State Insurance Corporation. These folks seem to be in charge of things, and for dealing with disagreements and disputes, they've set up a system with multiple levels. The state governments have to establish medical boards, medical appeal tribunals, and employees' insurance courts, specifically to handle issues that come up under Chapter 4.
So a specialized system just for these types of dispute.
Right, and they specifically say that regular civil courts can't get involved in these cases. For enforcing the rules, both the central and state governments can appoint inspector-cum-facilitators. Their job is to make sure everyone's following the rules, and they even mention doing these inspections online in the future. These inspectors have some serious power. They can enter workplaces, demand to see documents, and question people.
So they've got some teeth to make sure people comply.
For sure. The code also lays out very clear steps for collecting money that's owed, including using recovery certificates and even directly taking the money if they have to. And they're big on financial accountability. They require yearly audits of the Social Security organizations by the Comptroller and Auditor General of India, and these organizations have to create ledgets and submit annual reports.
So checks and balances to keep things transparent and responsible.
Exactly. And to make sure the funds are healthy in the long run, the code says they need to regularly assess the value of their assets and liabilities. So they've got this whole system in place to manage things, with specific bodies to handle disputes, ways to enforce the rules, and a big focus on financial transparency. This shows they're serious about making sure this code works and protects workers' rights.
It sounds like a very thorough and well thought out system.
Yeah, it seems like they've really tried to cover all the angles. Now, something interesting is how the code handles specific sectors, like construction. Building and construction workers have their own dedicated welfare boards, and these boards get their funding from a special tax on construction projects, with the rates somewhere between 1% and 2%.
So they're directly funding these boards through the industry itself.
Exactly. And then these welfare boards use that money to provide a whole range of Social Security benefits to registered construction workers. It shows they're paying attention to the unique needs of this industry, which often has a lot of informal employment.
Yeah, construction work can be pretty precarious, so it makes sense to have a system that specifically addresses those vulnerabilities.
Definitely. And what about all those folks working in the unorganized sector, which is huge in India? That includes the gig workers and platform workers we were talking about earlier. The code requires these workers to register, and it gives both the central and state governments the power to create social security schemes specifically for them. And here's the interesting part. The funding for these schemes can come from a few different places. The government, the companies that these workers work for, or a mix of both. I think this is a big step towards making sure these new and growing types of jobs have some kind of safety net.
It is. Recognizing and including gig and platform workers in the Social Security framework is a big deal. It shows they're acknowledging the changing landscape of work and trying to provide some level of protection for those who aren't in traditional employee relationships. And having different options for funding gives them flexibility to tailor solutions to different groups.
For sure. Now, another big part of this code is the use of Aadhaar, which is India's unique identification number. People will have to use their Aadhaar number to register under the code and to claim any benefits. This is all about simplifying things and making the system more efficient, but it also raises questions about privacy and making sure everyone has access.
Yeah, Aadhaar can be a powerful tool for making things smoother, but it's important to make sure it doesn't create barriers for people or compromise their privacy.
Absolutely. So the code recognizes that a one-size-fits-all approach might not always be the best, so they've included a way for the appropriate government to exempt certain establishments from some of the rules. But there's a catch. They can only grant these exemptions if the employees are already getting benefits that are basically the same as or even better than what the code offers. And the companies that get these exemptions have to meet certain conditions and keep reporting back to the government.
So it's like, you can do your own thing, but it can't be worse than what the code provides. And you have to be transparent about it.
Exactly. Now, any law needs a way to make sure people follow it, right? And this code is no different. It lists out various offenses and says what the penalties are for breaking the rules. These can be fines or even jail time in some cases, and the penalties get tougher if you keep breaking the rules, especially if you don't pay your contributions or provide the benefits you're supposed to. But here's something interesting. They also give employers a chance to fix things before they get into serious trouble, as long as it's not a repeat offense within a 3-year period. And for some first-time offenses, you might be able to pay a certain amount and avoid prosecution altogether.
So there's a balance between being strict and giving people a chance to make things right.
Yeah, I think it's a fair approach. Now, the last big thing to understand is what this new code is replacing. It actually repeals 9 existing labor laws that deal with Social Security. This includes some really big ones like the Employees Compensation Act, the Employees State Insurance Act, and the Employees Provident Funds Act.
So it's a major consolidation of existing legislation.
It is, but they're not just throwing everything out and starting from scratch. To make the transition smooth, anything that's been done under these old laws and any existing Social Security schemes will generally stay in effect for a while until they're officially replaced by the new code. This is all about making sure things keep running smoothly while the new system is being set up.
So it's a big change, but they're doing it carefully to minimize disruptions.
Exactly. So after all that, what does this deep dive tell us? What does it mean for you, the listener? Well, it shows us a huge effort to make Social Security in India more comprehensive and accessible, covering everyone across all sectors of employment. We've seen how they're really focused on defining exactly who this code applies to, how it's structured, and what they want to achieve. And while we didn't cover every single detail, this overview should give you a solid foundation for understanding this new law.
And here's where things get really interesting. This is a massive piece of legislation, right? It's replacing 9 old laws and trying to cover a whole lot of ground. So the next big thing to watch is how they actually put it into practice. What will Social Security for gig and platform workers actually look like in real life? How will they register all those workers in the unorganized sector? These are the questions we'll need to follow as this code gets rolled out.
Yeah, it's one thing to write it all down. It's another thing to make it work for millions and millions of people, especially in a country as vast and diverse as India. Getting all those unorganized workers registered and making sure the benefits actually reach them, that's a monumental task.
It is. We'll have to see how they manage the logistics of it all.
Okay, so after all that, I hope you have a much clearer picture of what this Social Security code is all about. It's a big deal, and it has the potential to change a lot of things. And hopefully we've sparked your curiosity to learn more about some of the specifics. What stood out to you as the most interesting or maybe even surprising part of this code? Maybe it was the really broad definition of child when it comes to maternity benefits, or maybe it was how much attention they're giving to workers who haven't been well protected in the past. Whatever it is, we encourage you to dig deeper, maybe even check out the full text of the code yourself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been quite a journey.
It has.
Briefing document. Key themes and ideas from the Social Security Code, 2020. This briefing document summarizes the main themes, important ideas, and facts extracted from the provided excerpts of the SS Code YouTube PDF, likely the official Gazette publication of the Social Security Code, 2020, and supplementary materials Social Security Code 2020. Frequently asked questions and Social Security Code 2020. Study Guide. 1. Commencement and applicability. The code's provisions will come into force on dates appointed by the central government, and different dates may be set for different provisions. Any reference in any such provision to the commencement of this code shall be construed as a reference to the coming into force of that provision. The applicability of specific chapters, as outlined in the first schedule, is as specified in that schedule, without affecting the applicability of other provisions. Chapter 3, likely concerning Provident Fund, pension, and insurance, can be made applicable to an establishment by the Central Provident Fund Commissioner upon agreement between the employer and a majority of employees, through a notification to. Definition of appropriate government. The appropriate government is crucial for determining jurisdiction and responsibilities under the code. The central government is the appropriate government for specific types of establishments, including ports, air transport service, telecommunication, banking and insurance companies, corporations or other authorities established by a central act, central public sector undertakings, CPSUs, and their subsidiary companies, autonomous bodies owned or controlled by the central government, including contractor establishments for these entities. Companies where the central government holds not less than 51% of the paid-up share capital. Establishments having departments or branches in more than one state. The central government shall continue to be the appropriate government for the central public sector undertakings even if the holding of the central government reduces to less than 50% equity in that public sector undertaking after the commencement of this code. For all other establishments, the appropriate government is the respective state government. 3. Key definitions. The code provides numerous definitions that shape its scope and application. Some important ones include: persons seeking employment encompasses I. Persons who seek to employ employees. 2. Persons who seek employment. 3. Occurrence of vacancies. And IV. Persons who seek vocational guidance and career counseling or guidance to start self-employment. Central Board means the Board of Trustees of the Employees Provident Fund constituted under Section 4. Central Provident Fund Commissioner means the Central Provident Fund Commissioner of the Central Board appointed under Section 1 of Section 14. Child for Chapter 6. This definition is expanded for the purposes of maternity and related benefits to include a stillborn child, a minor illegitimate son, an unmarried illegitimate daughter or a daughter legitimate or illegitimate or adopted if married and a minor or if widowed and a minor brother or an unmarried sister or a widowed sister if a minor, a widowed daughter-in-law, a minor child of a predeceased son, a minor child of a predeceased daughter where no parent of the child is alive, or a grandparent if no parent of the employee is alive. The explanation clarifies that references to a son, daughter or child include an adopted son, daughter or child, respectively. Dock work. This includes work in or within the vicinity of any port in connection with, or required for, or incidental to, the loading, unloading, movement or storage of cargoes into or from ship or other vessel. Port, dock, storage place or landing place, including ship preparation and maintenance within docks. Employer, defined based on the type of establishment, generally the person or authority with ultimate control over the affairs of the establishment. For a factory, it's the occupier. Establishment, a broad term including a place where any industry, trade, business, manufacture or occupation is carried on, or a factory, motor transport undertaking, newspaper establishment, audio-visual production, building and other construction work or plantation, or a mine, port or vicinity of port where dock work is carried out. Different departments or branches are treated as part of the same establishment for Chapter 3. Factory, defined as premises where a manufacturing process is being carried on with or without the aid of power, employing a certain number of workers. Specific exclusions apply. Maternity benefit for Chapter 6 means the payment referred to in subsection 1 of Section 60. Occupier of a factory, the person who has ultimate control over the affairs of the factory. Special provisions exist for firms, companies, and ships under repair in dry docks. Pension fund means the pension fund established under Clause B of subsection 1 of Section 16. Pension scheme means the employee's pension scheme framed under Clause B of subsection 1 of Section 15. Plantation, defined based on the type of crops grown and the size of the land, with provisions for contiguous land and state government notifications. Self-employed worker, a person not employed by an employer, engaged in the unorganized sector with a monthly earning limit or holding cultivable land below a certain ceiling, as notified by the appropriate government. Shop, defined according to the existing laws dealing with shops in a particular state for social security organizations and schemes. The code establishes various social security organizations, including the Central Board of Trustees of the Employees Provident Fund. The central government may frame schemes, including the Employees Provident Fund Scheme and the Employees Pension Scheme, specifying their applicability and providing for various benefits. The schemes referred to in clauses A, B, and C of subsection 1 may provide for all or any of the matters respectively specified in Part A, Part B and Part C of the 5th Schedule. The corporation, likely the Employees State Insurance Corporation, is empowered to acquire and hold property, invest funds, raise loans with government sanction, and establish provident or benefit funds for its staff. The corporation may also establish medical education institutions to improve service quality, requiring students to furnish bonds for serving the corporation. State governments are mandated to constitute building and other construction workers' welfare boards and may also constitute advisory committees for unorganized workers. The central government may constitute state boards after consulting with state governments, assigning them powers and functions. 5. Contributions and benefits implied. While specific contribution rates and benefit details are not extensively covered in these excerpts, the code lays the groundwork for these aspects within the envisioned schemes: Provident Fund Scheme, Pension Scheme, Insurance Scheme, etc. Maternity benefit is defined in relation to a specific Section 60, indicating its inclusion in Chapter 6. Provisions exist regarding sickness and disablement benefits, including conditions for eligibility and the requirements to remain under medical treatment. The code mentions gratuity as a benefit under its purview. Section 151 provides crucial protection for amounts standing to the credit of employees under various chapters, stating that they shall not in any way be capable of being assigned or charged and shall not be liable to attachment under any decree or order of any court. Furthermore, any amounts due under these chapters become a charge on the assets of the establishment and are to be paid with priority according to the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, 2016. 6. Governance and administration. The code outlines the roles and powers of various authorities, including the Central Provident Fund Commissioner, the Director General of the corporation, and competent authorities appointed by the appropriate governments. State governments will establish employees' insurance courts to adjudicate disputes related to Chapter 4. Civil courts are barred from dealing with matters under their jurisdiction. The central and state governments can appoint inspector cum facilitators to discharge duties and exercise powers related to inspection. An inspection scheme may be laid down, potentially involving web-based inspections and randomized selection. Inspectors have powers to enter premises, require the production of documents, and examine individuals. The code outlines procedures for the recovery of dues, including the issuance of recovery certificates and other modes of recovery from the employer or individuals holding money on their behalf. Social security organizations are required to maintain proper accounts, which will be audited annually by the Controller and Auditor General of India. They are also required to prepare budget estimates and annual reports. Funds maintained by social security organizations will undergo periodic valuation of assets and liabilities by appointed valuers or actuaries. The central and state governments have the power to frame schemes to give effect to the provisions of the Code. 7. Offenses and penalties. The code specifies various offenses and their corresponding penalties, including imprisonment and fines for non-compliance with its provisions or schemes. Enhanced punishment is prior dismissal for second or subsequent offenses of a similar nature, particularly for failure to pay contributions or benefits. Offenses by companies can lead to the prosecution of individuals responsible for the conduct of the company's business, including directors and partners. Cognizance of offenses can only be taken upon a complaint by an aggrieved person or a notified officer, with prior sanction from designated authorities. Before initiating prosecution, employers may be given an opportunity to comply with relevant provisions through a written direction. However, this opportunity is not granted for repeated violations within 3 years. Certain first-time offenses punishable with fine only or imprisonment up to 1 year may be compounded by authorized officers upon payment of a prescribed amount. 8. Social Security Fund. The central government will establish a social security fund with separate accounts for funding various schemes, including those for unorganized workers, gig workers, and platform workers. State governments will also establish social security funds for the welfare of unorganized workers, funded through various sources. 9. Transitional provisions and repeal. The code repealed several existing labor laws listed in Section 164, including the Employees Provident Funds and Miscellaneous Provisions Act, 1952, the Employees State Insurance Act, 1948, the Maternity Benefit Act, 1961, and others. Actions taken under the repealed enactments will be deemed to have been done under the corresponding provisions of the code and will remain in force until contrary to the code or repealed under its provisions. Existing schemes and rules framed under the repealed acts, such as the Employees Provident Fund Scheme, 1952, will remain in force for a period of 1 year from the commencement of the code, to the extent they are not inconsistent with its provisions. Existing organizations like the Central Board under the EPF Act and the Employees State Insurance Corporation will continue to function as corresponding organizations under the code until new ones are constituted. 10. Rulemaking powers. The central government, state governments, and the corporation are empowered to make rules, regulations, and schemes to give effect to the provisions of the code. This includes specifying procedures, forms, eligibility criteria, and other operational details. The power to make rules, regulations, and schemes except those under Chapter 3 is subject to the condition of previous publication for a specified period to allow for feedback. 11. Overriding effect and protection of good faith actions. Section 161 grants the code an overriding effect over any inconsistent provisions in other laws, awards, agreements, or contracts of service. However, it also preserves more favorable benefits that employees may be entitled to under existing arrangements. The code protects actions taken in good faith by government entities, social security organizations, officers, and other authorized persons discharging their functions under the code from legal proceedings. 12. Power to amend schedules. The central government has the power to amend the 1st, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th schedules through notification. The appropriate government can amend the 2nd and 3rd schedules by way of addition. This briefing document provides a high-level overview of the key themes and important aspects covered in the provided excerpts of the Social Security Code, 2020. Further detailed analysis would require a review of the complete legislation and the specific rules and schemes framed thereunder.
Frequently asked questions. The Social Security Code, 2021. What is the short title of this legislation, and when did it receive presidential assent? While the short title isn't explicitly mentioned in the provided excerpts, the document indicates that the act received the assent of the President on the 28th of September 2020, and was published in the Official Gazette on September 29, 2020. The excerpts refer to it as this code. 2. Who are considered persons who seek employment according to this code? The code identifies 4 categories of persons who seek employment. I. Persons who seek to employ employees. 2. Persons who seek employment themselves. 3. Entities reporting the occurrence of vacancies. And IV. Individuals who seek vocational guidance and career counseling or guidance to start self-employment. 3. How does the code define the appropriate government and what determines whether it is the central or state government for a particular establishment? The appropriate government is either the central government or the state government, depending on the nature of the establishment. The central government is the appropriate government for establishments such as ports, air transport services, telecommunication, banking and insurance companies, corporations or authorities established by a central act, central public sector undertakings and their subsidiaries, autonomous bodies controlled by the central government, and any company with not less than 51% paid-up share capital held by the central government. It also applies to establishments having departments or branches in more than one state. For all other establishments, the appropriate government is the respective state government. 4. How does the definition of child under this code differ, particularly in the context of Chapter 6, which likely deals with maternity and related benefits? For the purposes of Chapter 6, the definition of child is expanded to include a stillborn child, in addition to biological and adopted sons and daughters, including minor illegitimate sons, unmarried minor illegitimate daughters, married minor daughters, and widowed minor daughters, minor brothers, unmarried minor sisters, widowed minor sisters if minor, widowed daughters-in-law, minor children of a predeceased son, and minor children of a
deceased daughter where no parent of the child is alive. A grandparent is also included if no parent of the employee is alive. 5. What constitutes dock work under the Social Security Code, 2020? Dock work encompasses any work conducted in or near any port that is connected with, required for, or incidental to the loading, unloading, movement, or storage of cargoes into or from ships or other vessels, port areas, docks, storage places, or landing places. This includes I. Work related to preparing ships for receiving or discharging cargo or leaving port, and 2. All repairing and maintenance processes associated with any hold, tank structure, lifting machinery, or any other storage area on board a ship or within the docks. 6. How does the code define a factory, and who is considered the occupier of a factory? A factory is defined as any premises, including its precincts, where a manufacturing process is carried on, and where either 20 or more workers are working or were working on any day of the preceding 12 months with the aid of power, or where 40 or more workers are working or were working without the aid of power. Certain entities like mines, mobile units of the armed forces, railway running sheds, and hotels, restaurants are excluded. The occupier of a factory is the person who has ultimate control over its affairs. In the case of a firm, any individual partner is deemed the occupier, and for a company, any director, excluding independent directors, is considered the occupier. For factories owned or controlled by the government or a local authority, the appointed manager is deemed the occupier. 7. What is the role of the Central Provident Fund Commissioner, and what is the purpose of the Employees' Pension Scheme? The Central Provident Fund Commissioner is the head of the Central Board of Trustees of the Employees' Provident Fund, and is appointed under Section 14(1) of the Code. The Employees' Pension Scheme is framed by the central government under Section 15(1)(b) to provide financial security to employees upon retirement, superannuation, or in case of permanent total disablement. It applies to establishments or classes of establishments as specified in the scheme. 8. How does the Social Security Code, 2020, protect the funds credited to an employee's account, and what priority is given to these dues in case of establishment insolvency? Section 151 of the Code provides significant protection to the amounts credited in favor of an employee under Chapters 3, IV, V, 6, or 7. These amounts cannot be assigned, charged, or attached under any decree or order of any court for any debt or liability incurred by the employee. Furthermore, any amount due under these chapters is established as a charge on the assets of the establishment to which it relates and shall be paid in priority in accordance with the provisions of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, 2016. Social Security Code 2020. Study Guide Quiz. What is the short title of this act, and on what date did it receive the President's assent? According to Section 2, what are the 4 categories of persons included in the definition of those who seek employment? Define appropriate government as it is used in the context of establishments such as ports, air transport services, and central public sector undertakings. For the purposes of Chapter 6 of this code, what is the definition provided for the term child? Explain what constitutes dock work as defined in this code, providing at least 2 examples included in the definition. What is the definition of factory provided in the code? And what are at least 2 specific exclusions from this definition? According to the code, who is considered the occupier in respect of a factory? Briefly mention a specific provision related to a firm or company. What is the role of the Central Provident Fund Commissioner as defined in this document? Describe the purpose of the employees' pension scheme that can't be framed by the central government. What is the significance of Section 151 of this code concerning the amount credited in favor of an employee under specific chapters? Quiz answer key. The short title of this act is not explicitly stated in the provided excerpts. It received the assent of the President on the 28th of September, 2020. The 4 categories of persons who seek employment are: I. Persons who seek to employ employees. 2. Persons who seek employment. 3. Occurrence of vacancies. And IV. Persons who seek vocational guidance and career counseling or guidance to start self-employment. In relation to establishments such as ports, air transport services, telecommunication, banking and insurance companies, central public sector undertakings, and establishments with branches in more than one state, the appropriate government is the central government. For the purposes of Chapter 6, child includes a stillborn child. Dock work means any work in or within the vicinity of any port connected to the loading, unloading, movement, or storage of cargoes into or from ships, ports, docks, or storage places. Examples include work in connection with the preparation of ships for cargo, or leaving port, and all repairing and maintenance processes connected with any hold, tank structure, or lifting machinery on board the ship or in the docks. A factory is defined as any premises, including the precincts thereof, I. Where any manufacturing process is being carried on, or 2. Wherein 20 or more workers are working or were working on any day of the preceding 12 months, and wherein the manufacturing process is being carried on with the aid of power. Exclusions include a mine, A mobile unit belonging to the armed forces, railways running shed, or hotel, restaurant, or eating place. In respect of a factory, the occupier means the person who has ultimate control over the affairs of the factory. In the case of a firm, any one of the individual partners is deemed to be the occupier. In the case of a company, any one of the directors, except an independent director, is deemed to be the occupier. The Central Provident Fund Commissioner is the commissioner of the Central Board appointed under subsection 1 of Section 14. The employee's pension scheme is framed by the central government for the purpose of providing for superannuation pension, retiring pension, or permanent total disablement pension to the employees of any establishment or class of establishments to which Chapter 3 applies. Section 151 states that the amount credited in favor of an employee under Chapters 3, IV, V, 6, or 7 shall not be capable of being assigned or charged, and shall not be liable to attachment under any decree or order of any court in respect of any debt or liability incurred by the employee. It also establishes these dues as a charge on the assets of the establishment, to be paid in priority according to the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, 2016. Essay format questions analyze the significance of the definitions provided in Section 2 of the Social Security Code, 2020. How do these definitions shape the scope and application of the Code's various provisions? Provide specific examples from the text to support your analysis. Discuss the roles and responsibilities of the central government and the state government in the administration and implementation of the Social Security Code, 2020, as evidenced in the provided excerpts. Highlight areas where their jurisdictions intersect or diverge. Examine the provisions related to Social Security schemes such as the Employees Provident Fund Scheme and the Employees Pension Scheme outlined in the Code. What are the key objectives and potential benefits of these schemes for employees and employers? Evaluate the mechanisms for enforcement, compliance, and recovery of dues under the Social Security Code, 2020, as described in the excerpts. What measures are in place to ensure adherence to the Code? And what are the potential consequences of noncompliance? Critically assess the transitional provisions outlined in Section 153, and the power to amend schedules in Section 152. What do these sections suggest about the legislative intent regarding the implementation and future adaptability of the Social Security Code, 2020? Glossary of key terms. Appropriate government refers to either the central government or the state government, depending on the type of establishment. For certain establishments like ports, central public sector undertakings, and those with branches in multiple states, it is the central government. For other establishments, it is the state government. Central Board means the Board of Trustees of the Employees Provident Fund constituted under Section 4 of the Code. Central Provident Fund Commissioner, the appointed head of the Central Board, responsible for administering the Employees Provident Fund. Child, for Chapter 6, includes a biological or adopted son or daughter, including illegitimate and married minor daughters, and widowed minor daughters, a minor brother, or unmarried widowed minor sister, a widowed daughter-in-law, a minor child of a predeceased son or daughter under certain conditions, and a grandparent, if no parent of the employee is alive, and importantly, a stillborn child. Competent authority, an officer appointed by the appropriate government to implement specific provisions of the Code within a defined area. Corporation likely refers to the Employee State Insurance Corporation, although not explicitly defined in the provided excerpts. It is an entity that can establish medical education institutions and manage related affairs. Dock work, any work in or near a port related to the loading, unloading, movement, or storage of cargo to or from ships or other vessels, including preparation of ships, maintenance, and other incidental tasks. Employee, while a full definition is not provided, the excerpts refer to persons who seek employment and include various categories of workers in the second schedule. The third proviso to Clause 26 of Section 2 lists specific persons considered employees. Employer, persons who seek to employ employees, as well as those having ultimate control over an establishment. Specific definitions exist for factories, mines, and other establishments. Establishment, a place where any industry, trade, business, manufacture, or occupation is carried on, including factories, mines, ports, plantations, and more. Different departments or branches are treated as part of the same establishment for Chapter 3. Factory, any premises, including precincts, where a manufacturing process is carried on with the aid of power, and 20 or more workers are employed, or without the aid of power, and 40 or more workers are employed. Excludes mines, mobile units of armed forces, railway running sheds, and hotels, restaurants. Inspector cum facilitator, an officer appointed by the appropriate government to discharge duties and exercise powers related to inspection and facilitation under the Code. Maternity benefit, for Chapter 6. The payment referred to in subsection 1 of Section 60, related to benefits for pregnant employees. Occupier of a factory, the person who has ultimate control over the affairs of the factory. This includes partners in a firm, directors in a company, excluding independent directors, and appointed managers for government-owned factories. Pension fund. The fund established under Clause B of subsection 1 of Section 16 for the employee's pension scheme. Pension scheme. The employee's pension scheme framed by the central government under Clause B of subsection 1 of Section 15 to provide various pension benefits. Plantation. Land used for growing tea, coffee, rubber, cinchona, or cardamom of 5 hectares or more, or other plants of 5 hectares or more employing 10 or more persons, with central government approval. State governments can also notify smaller lands as plantations. Social Security Organization. A general term referring to bodies established under this code for the administration of Social Security benefits, such as the Central Board, and potentially the Employee State Insurance Corporation. Social Security Fund. Funds established by the central and state governments for the welfare of workers, particularly unorganized workers, funded through various sources.
Detailed timeline of main events covered in the sources. September 28, 2020. The Act of Parliament, Social Security Code, 2020, received the assent of the President of India. September 29, 2020, the Ministry of Law and Justice, Legislative Department, published the Act in the Official Gazette for General Information. Commencement of the Code General. The Code comes into force on such date as the central government may, by notification in the Official Gazette, appoint. Different dates may be appointed for different provisions. Applicability of chapters. The applicability of specific chapters, as per the first schedule, will be as specified in the corresponding entry in that schedule. Applicability of Chapter 3 Provident Fund to specific establishments. The Central Provident Fund Commissioner may, by notification, apply Chapter 3 to an establishment if the employer and the majority of employees agree. This can be effective from the date of the agreement or any subsequent date specified. Constitution of State Building and Other Construction Workers' Welfare Boards. Every state government shall, by notification, appoint a date and constitute such a board. Constitution of State Boards, by central government. The central government may, after consulting with the state government, constitute a state board for that state by notification. Framing of schemes, Employees Provident Fund, Pension, Insurance. The central government may, by notification, frame schemes such as the Employees Provident Fund Scheme, the Employees Pension Scheme, and the Employees Deposit Linked Insurance Scheme. These schemes can be modified prospectively or retrospectively. Establishment of Pension Fund. The pension fund is established under Clause B of subsection 1 of Section 16. Insurance of employees. Every employee in an establishment to which Chapter 4 applies shall be insured in the manner prescribed by the central government. Establishment of medical education institutions by corporation. The corporation, like LIASIC, may establish medical education institutions like colleges and training institutes. Constitution of Employees Insurance Courts. The state government shall, by notification, constitute employees' insurance courts for specified local areas. Appointment of competent authorities. Gratuity. The appropriate government may, by notification, appoint competent authorities for the implementation of Chapter 5 gratuity. Appointment of competent authorities. Unorganized workers. The state government may, by notification, appoint competent authorities for the purposes of Chapter 9, unorganized workers. Constitution of Building Workers' Welfare Fund. A Building Workers' Welfare Board shall constitute a fund called the Building and Other Construction Workers' Welfare Fund. Formulation of schemes for unorganized workers. The central government may formulate schemes for self-employed workers and other unorganized workers. State governments may also notify schemes for unorganized workers. Establishment of Social Security organizations and maintenance of accounts. Each Social Security organization shall maintain proper accounts of income and expenditure, as specified by the appropriate government in consultation with the Comptroller and Auditor General of India. Audit of accounts. The accounts of each Social Security organization shall be audited annually by the Comptroller and Auditor General of India. Appointment of Inspector cum Facilitators. the central government, for Chapters 3 and IV, and the appropriate government, for other provisions, may, by notification, appoint inspector cum facilitators. Constitution of Social Security Fund. The central government shall establish a Social Security Fund. State governments shall also establish a Social Security Fund for the welfare of unorganized workers. Continuance of existing boards and schemes. Organizations constituted under the repealed enactments, like the Central Board under the EPF Act, ESIC, and Building Workers' Welfare Boards, shall continue to function as corresponding organizations under this code until new ones are constituted or their existing term expires, whichever is earlier. Existing schemes under the repealed acts, like EPF Scheme 1952, EPS 1995, ESI rules and regulations, shall remain in force for 1 year from the commencement of this code, to the extent they are not inconsistent with the code. Power to frame rules, regulations, and schemes. The central government, state governments, and the corporation are empowered to make rules, regulations, and schemes to give effect to the provisions of the code, subject to conditions like previous publication. Overriding effect of the code. The provisions of this code shall have effect notwithstanding anything inconsistent therewith in any other law, award, agreement, or contract of service. However, more favorable benefits under existing arrangements shall continue. Repeal of existing acts. The enactments listed in the 7th Schedule, including the Employees' Provident Funds and Miscellaneous Provisions Act, 1952, the Employees' State Insurance Act, 1948, the Maternity Benefit Act, 1961, the Payment of Gratuity Act, 1972, and others, are repealed upon the commencement of this code. Cast of characters and brief bios. The President of India, head of state who gave assent to the Social Security Code, 2020, making it an act. Ministry of Law and Justice, Legislative Department, the government body responsible for publishing the enacted law in the Official Gazette. Central Government, the governing authority of the Union of India. Under the Social Security Code, it holds significant powers, including appointing commencement dates, framing schemes for certain sectors, and acting as the appropriate government for specific establishments like ports, CPSUs, and those with multi-state operations. State government, the governing authority of individual states within India. They are designated as the appropriate government for establishments not under the purview of the central government and have responsibilities like constituting welfare boards and insurance courts. Central Provident Fund Commissioner, an officer of the Central Board, appointed under Section 14(1), responsible for the administration of the Employees' Provident Fund. Director General of the Corporation, head of the corporation, likely the Employees' State Insurance Corporation, with potential roles in making Chapter 4 inapplicable to certain establishments under specific conditions. Central Board, Board of Trustees of the Employees' Provident Fund, a body constituted under Section 4, responsible for administering the Employees' Provident Fund. Employees State Insurance Corporation, a Social Security organization responsible for administering the Employees' State Insurance under Chapter 4. It has the power to establish medical education institutions. Medical Benefit Committee, a committee potentially within the Employees State Insurance Corporation, involved in medical benefits. Standing Committee, another committee potentially within the Employees State Insurance Corporation, with unspecified functions in the provided excerpts. Building Workers' Welfare Board, boards constituted by state governments under Section 7 to exercise powers and perform functions related to the welfare of building and other construction workers. Inspector cum facilitator, officers appointed by the central or appropriate government to discharge duties of inspection and facilitation under the code. Competent authority, officers appointed by the appropriate government to implement specific provisions of the code within a defined area, e.g., for gratuity or unorganized workers. Recovery officer, officers authorized by the central or state government, the central board, or the corporation to exercise powers for the recovery of dues under the code. Authorized officer, an officer who can send certificates for the recovery of dues to the recovery officer. Medical board, a body constituted under regulations, likely by the corporation to deal with medical assessments and reviews related to disablement benefits. Medical Appeal Tribunal, a body constituted by regulations to hear appeals against decisions of the medical board. Employees Insurance Court, courts constituted by the state government to adjudicate on disputes and questions related to Chapter 4. Central Board of Trustees for Employees' Provident Fund, the corresponding organization to the Central Board constituted under the EPF Act, which will continue to function temporarily. Executive Committee, a committee constituted under the Central Board of Trustees for Employees Provident Fund, which will also continue to function temporarily. Valuer Actuary, professionals appointed by Social Security organizations or establishments, with prior approval of the appropriate government to conduct valuations of assets and liabilities of funds. Comptroller and Auditor General of India, the authority responsible for auditing the accounts of the Social Security organizations. Convert to text, convert to source.